everyone, welcome to this special conversation that we're having in honor of Mental Health Month. My name is Sonjel, and I am so excited to be joined by Laura Hedayati, who is a clinical psychologist who specializes in child, adolescent, and family mental health. Now, Laura was born in Australia, grew up in New Zealand, and has called Australia home for the last 20 years. She's married and has 3 grown children, and she likes to work from the domain of strengths that each and one of us has. And she helps people uphold and build on those strengths. So I'm very excited for this conversation. Laura is joining us from Nowra, which is about 2 hours south of Sydney, and we're just going to chat for a little while about mental health, about children, about resiliency, and anything else that comes up in the meantime. So maybe we could start by talking about how we can help children build resilience during difficult times.
Well, thank you, Sonjel. I think that's a really important area to put our focus and energy into. Perhaps never before has it been, I think, so pressing. I know where I come from, we've gone from bushfires to floods to COVID with really no pause. And for a lot of our children, they've really been, their formative years are being shaped by uncertainty, by fear. And our little kiddies are sponges. So they're really good little observers, but they're not very good at interpreting what they observe. And I think that's where, as adults, we have such an important and powerful role in shaping the inner narrative of our children. And I'm mindful of a beautiful quote by Baha'i, which says that children are the most precious treasure. Well, actually, no, it's by the international governing body, the Baha'i Faith. But it is based on the words of Baha'i, that children are the most precious treasure that a community can possess. For in them is the promise and the guarantee of the future. And so it really puts to the forefront of our minds just how precious our children are. And the quote then also goes on to talk about that it's actually our actions as adults that will really shape the character of our children. So if we think about our children as being these precious little gems, which they are, gems invested with spiritual qualities that are there in potential, but we as the adults, as the caregivers, need to bring them to the surface. We need to help them. It's like we're shining a torch on these precious qualities they have. We need to help them to understand that within, embedded within, as a gift, they have the qualities of resiliency. They have the qualities of kindness, of care, of love, and even the edgy ones like fortitude and patience and determination. And that these experiences are experiences to help them to grow and to learn. And I think without that guidance and the model, so it's not just our words, it's actually how we behave as adults, because our actions of now will be their actions of the future. I think without us as adults being able to help them to, one, see their worth and value, and also model for them the qualities that they need, I think they're adrift. And so I think that, as I said before, children need to see challenges as an opportunity to respond with the qualities within. And some of these will be strengths already, because our children come into the world as a bundle, as a package. I have 3 kids. They are all so different. Same parents, I would say a very similar upbringing, but they're very different. And so one child may be quite strong in being joyful, and another child may have to work a little harder at being optimistic and joyful, and they may be more likely to see the cloud. And so as a parent and as an adult in a community, because all our children are our treasures, It's my role to reflect to children their potential and their specialness and the qualities within.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but I have found that in times of difficulty, I know that my children can feel what I'm feeling, whether I say anything or not. If I'm feeling anxious, they can tell. If I'm feeling fearful, stressed, they can tell. And so I've just decided I'm going to be honest with them and tell them, yeah, I'm nervous right now, or I'm scared, or I feel uncertain, and it doesn't feel comfortable, but that's okay. We will get through it.
Look, I think that if you think back to that, we are the models. We navigate challenge is what they see. And if we fail to acknowledge perfectly normal human emotions, and let's face it, we are wired with part of our brain that is wired for anxiety. It's watch out, be careful. And we've all got that. And we will continue to have times in our life where we will feel anxious. And why wouldn't we acknowledge, I'm feeling a little anxious right now. I'm feeling a little scared. But then we go on and we problem solve. And we look, what can we do to turn down the heat? What can we do to kind of overcome? What can we do to manage? What kind of resources do I need to draw upon to be able to help me through this? Because we're also wired for connectivity. We're also wired for collaboration, for mutual assistance. So what are the resources that we have to draw on and model that ourselves? And I think that one of the damaging things that we've done, especially to our little boys, is we're giving them a message that they're to be islands. Actually, it's a weakness to show vulnerability. It's a weakness to actually admit that you have those softer or those more edgy emotions. And I feel that's so destructive to our children, to our boys especially. Our girls, it was more permissible to be able to do that. And our girls, I think, have a bit of a natural edge to be able to be more social. But boys, from research, are actually born a little bit more sensitive. And then, unfortunately, some of the social forces in our society actually distort that and make them more isolated. And I think we need to remember, as human beings, we're not trees. We're not perfectly content to be planted on a hillside all by ourselves. We actually want to be together. We want to join on the strength of each other. So I think actually that's a really great thing to do, and I think it's really wise to one, admit that we actually do have emotions, and that emotions go the whole gambit from really positive emotions to really maybe more negative emotions, but also then to model how we actually work with them and overcome them.
Yeah. I was wondering, I've been doing a little bit of reading about what resilience is. And from my basic understanding, it's like a concept of an elastic, that in times of stress, the elastic is pulled, and that resilience is being able to kind of snap back into place and go with the flow. But I'm wondering, does the discourse on mental health and resiliency talk about the fact that these tests are opportunities to grow, and in the end you can come out as something stronger or more flexible, more adaptable than you were in the beginning?
I'd like to say yes, as an overall overarching principle, because I think it's really important that we see challenge and struggle, which is inevitable and part of life. I mean, if you think of the physical world as being an example of the spiritual within, and just the concept of the act of being born is a struggle. It's challenging. If you think about the development of a physical muscle, it comes through resistance, it comes through effort. So if you think about spiritual qualities that are embedded within us, and I would call resilience very much a spiritual quality, fortitude a spiritual quality, grit a spiritual quality. How do we actually develop them? How do we nurture them? How do we actually strengthen them? And the way that we do that is through seeing experiences that are challenging as opportunities to grow and learn. And if we see them opportunity experiences that are negative as in some way punishing or diminishing, or who's done this so that I am suffering and who should I be blaming, I think we miss out on a really golden opportunity to actually to grow and to respond ably. You think of the quality of responsibility, you know, the word to respond ably. So I think if we think about what resiliency is doesn't mean you're not scared. You know, it doesn't mean that that you're not enduring. It doesn't mean you're not uncomfortable, but you don't retreat and avoid. You look at how do you problem solve. You look at what do I need to help me get through this. Yeah. And so you look within. You may look without to look at the resources that you draw upon, but you see it as this is something that I will emerge from in some way stronger.
Yes.
And so I think that that's a very different mindset. I get really concerned, and I see this. I mean, I've been practicing since 97, sorry. I started training in 87. And I do think over the last maybe 5 to 10 years, there's been more of an emphasis within some parents that I see in my clinic to really struggle with seeing their children struggle.
Yes.
And really finding it very difficult to not want to step in and buffer their children from, one, the consequences of their own actions, and two, the consequences of negative emotion. So take anxiety, for an example. As I said before, anxiety is very much a natural part of life. You know, if we didn't have the capacity to get anxious, to be aware of potential threat and danger, which is where anxiety comes from, we'd be less likely to be vigilant about roads safety. We'd be less vigilant about height. You know, we'd be less vigilant about heat. You know, all those kinds of things that can trip us up. You know, children learn from the negative consequences. You know, you don't touch something hot more than once. I grew up on a farm, and I can assure you, once you've been hit by an electric fence once, you are forever mindful about electric fences. And I think, again, that's the world is like that. It teaches us by consequences. And if we as parents buffer children from experiencing the normal emotional responses to everyday life situations, we actually diminish growth, but we also condition them to anxiety. So, say for example, your child becomes anxious in they have to do a speech at school, which is a very normal part of school. If their child is anxious and comes to the parent and talks about their anxiety, a parent can do two things. They can look at how do you problem solve your way through this, and what are the tools that you can do to manage that anxiety, and validate their concerns, and look at so that everybody gets anxious. You know, fear of public speaking is the number one fear, and you know, I have been concerned about public speaking, and this is what I did, and help them to actually navigate that. Or you can join your child in their anxiety, and you can look at how can you buffer and prevent them from feeling anxious and minimize their opportunities to learn. So we get situations now where children don't do the speech in front of the class. They go and speak to the teacher privately, or they do an alternative exercise so that they don't have to be placed in a situation of anxiety. So what it does is then it escalates their anxiety about speaking in front of a group of people. It strengthens it and makes it stronger. And anxiety being what it is, and it is not your friend, it grows stronger, and it attaches itself to other things. So the next thing you know, that your child might be anxious about reading, you know, in front of grandma, or answering the telephone, or going out to ask for something at the corner shop. And little by
Mm-hmm.
little, you see children become more and more anxious and wanting the world to be modified and adapted to cater to their
Yes.
anxiety. And one, it's not helpful for them. It doesn't help them grow. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
realistic for a world where we shape it and we modify it to suit people's personal preferences. We've got over 8 billion people. How are we going to have some sort of cohesive, united society if we have 8 billion people who say, but this is the way I want the world to look like? It's not going to work. So I see this more and more in parents and children I work with, and you're really struggling to help parents to see that actually your child's struggle is a good thing. You're there to help them. You're there to help them to be able to work through it, not avoid it, not withdraw from it, because that actually makes it worse. And also, it's contagious. Anxiety is contagious.
Yeah.
You know, we have an energy. We pick up each other's anxiety, and that can make it harder for everybody. But again, we can work together to manage it, to work through it.
Yeah. Well, this makes me think, there's, I believe it's Abdu'l-Baha who talks about accustoming children to hardship.
Mm.
And I've talked to other mothers about this, and they've said, well, what does that mean? And what do you do?
Mm.
And I found myself saying, you don't need to do anything to impose a hardship upon your child, because life naturally will have hardships that they have to navigate themselves.
Mm.
And they have to learn exactly how to work through it.
Well, very much so. I think that, right from there, and their hardships are very much developmentally dependent. A child falling over when they've just pulled themselves up, it's a hardship. You don't, when they're a toddler and they've fallen over or they're trying to learn to stand, you don't go in there and rescue them. You encourage them to try again. I think we've all probably got the bang on the head from when we were walking as a toddler and hit something. Us to be more careful. It teaches us that hard things hurt. And we, again, I'm all for keeping children safe, absolutely. But we need to be careful that we don't make their environment so sanitized that it's not reality anymore. And we have children who don't have the ability to learn from the consequences of their actions, and they don't look within for the tools and skills that they need. And if hardship happens, they're not seeing it as opportunities for growth, but it's who's making my life uncomfortable, and blaming and becoming very, very negative. Because if we don't help our children to have that grit of character, that strength of character, they go down like dominoes when hard times happen. And as parents, you can't protect them from everything. Yes, they will be an employee one day, and it's highly likely they might get a negative review. The employer might say, well, these are the good things that you're doing, but I really want you to actually look at developing this aspect of yourself and improving that aspect. And that's called constructive feedback. Yes, it may be perceived as a negative within yourself, but it's something you can learn to overcome. We're not perfect. This is not the realm of perfection. We are meant to actually grow and learn and develop those qualities. And if we don't have resiliency, if we don't have that, as you talked about, that elastic, that ability to spring, but also to focus on the good and see how we are actually meant to be building those qualities within. We see negative as character diminishing rather than character building.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess we've talked a little bit about not shielding our children from hardships and allowing them to see difficult opportunities as a chance to grow. I'm wondering, what other ways can we support our children in their mental health, in finding contentment and happiness, and in developing their true moral purpose?
That's a great question. Look, I think that our children need to feel part of the community in which they're born. Now, the family, it's the neighbourhood, it's the community, it's the country, it's actually the world. Because really,
Yes.
we are rapidly moving towards a global society. And we want them to feel like, the world is their home. There's no guarantee that our children are going to live in our neighbourhood. They might not even live in our country. They could go live on the other side of the world. And we want to give them a sense that they have something to contribute. And in fact, in the words of Baha'u'llah, the purpose, he says, the purpose for which mortal men hath from utter nothingness come into the realm of being is to contribute to the betterment of the world and to work together in concord and harmony. And so we're sort of giving two understandings that, one, we work towards the betterment of the world, we contribute, but we also are to contribute in a way that leads to unity, to concord, to harmony. So I think we need to give children an outward focus of how we actually, what are the needs of the world in which they live, whether it's the needs of the family getting up at Monday, we're getting ready for school, and how can I address those needs? Or what might be the needs of my neighbourhood, and how can I address those needs? Do I have an elderly neighbour across the road who I know every rubbish day has trouble getting her rubbish bin to the curb? Can I do that to be able to help them? Because when we give our children an outward focus of contribution, I think it's incredibly protective for them in terms of the development of mental illness. I think it's incredibly protective to help them to see that they are part of something greater than themselves and they have something to contribute. And so their focus becomes on the I can rather than the I can't. So I think that the more as parents we can give our children a noble purpose, a lofty vision of themselves and what they can do to contribute, I think the more protective it is. And it's really interesting, when you work with children who are coming with depression or with anxiety, what you're trying to do is shift their focus from self to other.
Yes.
You're trying to shift them from being focused on their own narrow world to the world outside of themselves, to be able to add value to someone else's life, because we know when they add value to someone else's life, they actually add value to their own.
Yes.
And so you want them to have some sort of meaning and purpose that is greater than self. And unfortunately, and I really feel for parents, like my children now are 23, 21 and 19. And I think parenting now in some ways is harder than it was when I parented my littlies because of the social forces and influences that are everywhere. And I think technology is a wonderful tool. I mean, it has given us such an ability to connect, such an ability to seek knowledge, but remembering that knowledge is not necessarily wisdom. So we need to teach our children to be discerning. But I think with this ability to have access to such knowledge, our children are also able to be bombarded with understandings, expectations, social influences that could be very divorced from the family culture and the family values that you as parents are trying to instill. And you may be completely unaware of what might be happening in your child's bedroom that might be shaping their understandings of themselves, of their world, of their future, until something happens that you think, oh, I have no idea where that came from. And by then that attitude or that belief might already be quite entrenched. So I think as parents, we really need to help our children. And I said right at the start that children were great observers, but they're not good at interpreting.
Yes.
I think as parents, we need to help our children to discern. And it's not just parents, it's communities. We want to be part of communities that share the vision that our children are precious treasures, that we want to shape that character of our children in a way that's beneficial and contributory to the world. I think that we need to help them to discern the worth and value of a lot of the social forces that they're experiencing, because whilst parents are the first social influencer,
Yes.
they go to school and it becomes their peers and it becomes school and it becomes media. And unfortunately, it seems like those social influences kick in earlier and earlier than they used to. And I remember my daughter, Gemma, when she was about 3. Now, I'm no fashion princess. She was getting dressed to go to preschool. And to me, preschool's about playing in the sand. It's about getting dirty. It's playing with water. It's painting. So she had a choice of clothes that is for that activity. To come home so that you have the nightly bath, so you're clean again. And I'm having a complete and utter meltdown because her clothes weren't pretty enough. Now I knew this did not come from me. It didn't come from her dad.
Yes.
That came from the other girls at preschool. And she's like 3 or 4. So what is she taking on board? That little girls have to be pretty, to be popular. They have to be, that defines them. And this was held so strongly in this little girl that she's willing to have a meltdown. And she didn't really have many meltdowns. My kids didn't really do that. But she was quite distressed about it, that her clothes weren't pretty enough and therefore she would be judged.
Yes.
And I think that's most unfortunate, that our little kids at that age are having to start thinking about those very external, materialistic things. Circling back to your question about, mental health and well-being, we know that there are pillars that support mental well-being, mental health. So one of the pillars is about how do we daily help our children to craft positive emotions.
Mm-hmm.
To see joyfulness, to be joyful, to be grateful, to appreciate the beauty around them, to notice the beauty in nature, the beauty in design, the beauty in ideas, the beauty in qualities other people show them, to be optimistic. So I think it's really important that as a family, as parents, as a community, we foster that, we model that ourselves, but we also foster that in our children. I think another of the pillars that we know contributes to mental well-being is for our children and ourselves, because we're all humans, is to have things that engage us, that are like a happy place. And by that I mean it's activities that we engage in, that we look up and it's like, gosh, where did that hour go? I was in my happy place.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the zone. And it's unique to all of us. So for some people, for some children, it might be just getting on the floor with Lego. It might be doing a craft activity. It might be learning a musical instrument. It might be going out in the garden. It might be being on the trampoline. It might be going for a run. But it's something that just draws them in and they lose themselves in it. We know another pillar is about social connections. It's about relationships. So we know that we and our children, that we need enough social connections with family and friends that enrich and sustain us. And children, just like adults, are all different. So some kids may just need a buddy or two. That's all they need. Other children need a whole group of kids to be buddies with, to be able to feel like they've got enough connections. We know that our children need to have a sense of meaning and purpose. And I think this is where spirituality comes in, is that we give our children a vision of themselves and their vision of the place in the world, and a sense that there's something out there greater than themselves.
Yes.
And that they want to develop all these qualities within as a gift back to that whatever that lofty, great, unknowable essence is, but it's something greater
Yes.
than them. That is benevolent, that is loving, that is caring, that wants the best from them. And I think the final pillar is about accomplishments and goals. So having something to strive for, whether it's small, getting through getting from one level of reading to the other level of reading, getting to chapter books. When my children were little, we used to talk about licenses, so they get things like the sharp knife license. And it was to aspire to. It wasn't something that happened automatically, and it was linked to increasing responsibility. So it wasn't necessarily an age thing. So I think that those kinds of those 5 kind of areas where we help our children to, and there's a beautiful quote that's attributed to Baha'u'llah, actually, the founder of the Baha'i faith, and he talks about the 4 attributes I love to see manifest in the people. And that first one, he says, a face wreathed in smiles and a radiant countenance. Now, who doesn't want to be greeted by a face wreathed in smiles and a radiant countenance? When you smile at someone, they're more likely to smile back. And we want to teach our children to be joyful, to smile, to want to engage with others. Baha'u'llah then goes on, the second one is courage and enthusiasm. To have courage. Courage doesn't mean you're not scared, you're not afraid, but you push through it. And you embrace the experience. The third one is to see with your own eyes and not through the eyes of others, and to know of your own knowledge, not through the knowledge of your neighbour. To help our children to discern, to learn to listen to that inner voice, that conscience, that spirit within. And the fourth one is that when you begin a job, to carry it through to the end, and that sparks back to resiliency. You don't give up, you complete, you commit, and that's about being trustworthy. When you say you'll do something, you actually do something, you do it. The job's not finished till it's over. And I used to say to my kids, it's not over till it's actually over. You don't give up. You actually keep persisting, because we need, in this world, we need people who will be determined, who will persevere, who will persist, because life can be tough. It can be really challenging. I know in many ways I'm really blessed. My kids are really blessed. They have their challenges. We all have our challenges. Some people have challenges that are far worse, but everyone we know will have challenges.
That's right. It's interesting, because I had wanted to ask you about children's classes and the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program and how that relates to mental health. But some of the things you have talked about in terms of promoting mental health among our children is what those programs do in terms of a sense of community, reading reality, seeing how you can serve others, and the emphasis on others as opposed to being on yourself. But it makes me wonder, when you're a Baha'i and you're striving to raise children with Baha'i principles and in a pattern of community life, sometimes you can feel apart. Especially, I know my middle child will say, I'm the only one in my class that doesn't get presents at Christmas, or why do we have to go to these things, these feasts and holy days, when none of my friends do, and in our community there aren't a lot of children. We have a lot of elderly people, and so how can Baha'i parents help their children to see that perhaps some of these things that they feel sets them apart is a gift?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge for your child that it can be hard to be different. And children have very different tolerances depending upon personality, of being able to be different. And so what one child will not even notice, another child finds a big struggle. And so there's no one size fits all for this, because our children are such different little people. Overall, though, I think we want to help our children to see what is the vision. Because all of our kids are aware, we come into the world wired with a quality of justice. And I think all our children will have been impacted by an injustice. And I think that we help them to see that Baha'u'llah's teachings are to create a more just and unified world. And how do we build that if we don't strive and we don't make effort and we don't do things differently? And we don't learn, and it's the whole world learning to how do we implement the framework that Baha'u'llah has given us. So it's really lofty to talk about, the oneness of the human family. But those are words until we actually start to bring them to action. And so how do you hold fast to the oneness, that knowledge of the oneness of the human family, when someone in your class has been unkind to you? And how do you help them to see that unkindness can come from many sources? It can come from ignorance, not knowing. It can come from someone being hurt, and hurt people hurt people. So maybe they got up in the morning and their mum or dad yelled at them, and then they missed the school bus, and then they forgot their lunch, and, you just got everything all at once. But if we want the world to be better, we need to do things differently. And I think it's helping them to understand why we serve and why we sacrifice and what are we trying to build. And it's exciting to build something that will help to dismantle some of these challenges that they face too. The words that they may be exposed to in the schoolyard, the behaviour that they may be exposed to, well, that plays out in neighbourhoods, it plays out in communities, it plays out in countries doing the same thing towards another country. If we want change, where do we start? And it starts with us. And so, yes, they're having to tolerate being different. But if we get a greater vision of oneness and unity, isn't that worth it? And then I also think that, you make spaces for them to see the joy and the fun. And I think you expose them to the wonderful models that we have, both young and old, within the Baha'i history of people who have shown amazing depth of character and fortitude and strength and resiliency. So they have something to model themselves on. And they're not alone. And not only within, the Baha'i history, but we have amazing examples in the world of people who are working shoulder to shoulder to try and bring about these principles of justice and unity. Who've never even heard of Baha'u'llah's revelation. Does it make sense? If we truly believe, and it makes, and science supports it, that we're actually all one human family, then if a member of that human family is struggling, we are actually all going to suffer. We're all going to struggle. And so using, the example of their little family, it's like if your brother's really sad, don't you feel sad? So we take it to the world. Well, if a country is struggling or a town is struggling, we all suffer. And how do we actually do something about that if we don't, not asked to do something different? And I think really help them. And this is where the children's class comes in. When we look at what education is, and as parents, let's face it, the moment we conceive a child, we start thinking about how do we bring the best of this for this little kiddie. and we often think about the intellectual education. What school? Children can be enrolled at a school almost from conception in some places, not so much, but I have heard in other parts of the world. um, so we're thinking about, well, what school should they go to, and what neighbourhood should we live in, and what sports activities should they do to develop their physical capacities. But one of the aspects I think that we don't think so much about, which I actually think is foundational and pivotal, is spiritual education. To explicitly teach our children about their spiritual aspect.
Yes.
And that's something that I think, that is the purpose of spirituality, of the great faiths of the world, is to remind us that we are spiritual beings, that we have a spiritual aspect, and that spiritual aspect is the spiritual qualities, and to have a love for knowledge, a thirst to be a lifelong learner, to be able to investigate the world around us, and see how we can be active agents for change in that world. And Baha'i communities offer to the world, right starting when the children are 5, a very explicit spiritual education program that fosters within children that understanding of their spiritual nature, and teaches them qualities, for example, like purity of heart, and to love justice, and to love humanity, and to be truthful, and to be generous, and to be selfless, and to be honest, and to be a good friend, and to consult. And explicitly it is teaching children those building blocks to be a good citizen. And then when they are 12, they have the ability to enter the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program, which really gives them the opportunity to come together with a group of peers and bring those qualities into action and service to the community, to think about what are the needs of the neighbourhood in which they live, and what can they do to address those needs, and acts of service. Because young people at that age, they're so idealistic, they're so energetic.
Yes.
They want to change the world. So give them a way that they can be positive, active agents for change in their community, so that they can be part of that. Because if they don't have a positive avenue to direct their energy, they'll find an area that's not so positive. And with the Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program, you have an animator who's an older youth, maybe late teens, early 20s, who kind of acts like a bigger friend, an encourager of the young people developing that desire to be of service. And they go through a sequence of booklets that take them through life big questions. So they might be fables of the world that have a moral meaning, or they might look explicitly at some of the challenges like peer group pressure. Like, how do we navigate conflict? How do we be a good friend? What do I want to devote my time towards? What do I see as my future career pathway? And then what are the goals to get there? So if I want to be, say, for example, a nurse, what do I need to be a nurse? Do I need to stay in school? Do I maybe want to get my first aid certificate? Do I maybe want to go and volunteer at a aged care residence? What is the pathway to get to that goal? So it's not just a vague longing, it actually becomes something concrete that I work towards. And thereby I know that I'm actually part of something bigger than myself. And then when young people are 15, you have a sequence of books that they can go through that really unfold those aspects for service that they can go through. And there's a number of different books. The first one is looking at Reflections on the Life of the Spirit, where they actually look at their spiritual aspect. And they look at, how do you feed that soul? And what is the journey of that soul? And what's our purpose? Why are we here? And the importance of taking that time for reflection and prayer and meditation to feed. We're so good about thinking about, how do I feed my body? Feed myself. So the Baha'i community offers to the world, an educational program from kind of the cradle to the grave almost, that constantly helps you to learn and to grow and to be of service and to want to connect with like-minded others who want the world to really mature into its potential, which is a just, kind, more equitable world.
That's right.
Mm.
Well, Laura, I want to say thank you really from the bottom of my heart, because you've given me a lot to think about and to mull over and reflect and see how it applies in my own life. So I'm really, really grateful to you for taking this time to be with us, or to be with me.
Thank you, Sonjel. You take care.
Thank you. You as well, Laura.